All right, part two of the movie at least. Part two of class, validity. The only time you guys ever talk to each other. Sorry. What's that? My Wednesday assessment class. My Wednesday assessment class, they speak a lot to each other, but they're cool. So, all right, let's keep going here with validity. All right. So validity is the degree to which a test measures what it was designed or what it was intended to measure. Right. So what are some things in life that are valid? It's going to be the same format as last lecture. What are some things that are valid? Intelligence tests are valid. What about outside of tests?
A thermometer.
A thermometer is valid? Is it measuring what it's intending to measure? Temperature, okay. So it's pretty valid, right? We use a thermometer to measure temperature. What are some other things that are valid?
A measuring cup.
A measuring cup. It's intending to measure something. What's that?
Items.
Items. Yes. At my house right now, it's kibble. The dog gets 2.5 cups in the morning, 3 at night. And then gravy on top, because he won't eat it unless there's gravy on top. Nice, right? He's at the doggy, not the kennel, I call it the kennel. My wife calls it the pet resort, because we're leaving. And I had to go in there today, drop the dog off, and be like, and here's his gravy. And so when he doesn't eat, just put a little gravy on top. It's ridiculous.
Like clearly your dog.
What's that?
He's clearly your dog.
Yeah. He had to get in the back of my car because my wife took her car to work today. She has a Subaru station wagon. It goes in the back. He goes in the back of that. So I don't want him in my car. And now she's like, oh, it's in my car today. I'm like, what? So that was quite a fiasco. The dog was drooling all over the back of my seat. Anyway. That, yeah, validity made me upset. What else is valid? Let's get off the dog topic.
Speedometer measures speed.
A speedometer measures speed. Can a speedometer measure anything else? What does a speedometer measure? Think about this.
The rate that your wheels are spinning at?
Yeah, actually it does that. It's RPM.
No, RPM is how fast the motor is spinning.
How fast the motor spinning is RPM.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with the wheels.
I'm not a
So what
Drives
is
fast.
I was thinking in terms of the speedometer, like measuring,
You know, it's not only measuring the speed of your vehicle, because in order to come to that measurement, it has to measure kind of like the air pressure and all these other things to come up with that number.
Okay.
It's not only like, we have this little car, but I was thinking of validity like a scale again,
Okay.
a weight scale.
Rip, and we'll talk about scales, I promise. Does it have the speedometer piece?
it measures how fast you can go in.
That is how fast you can go in an hour.
miles you can go in an hour.
Exactly. Your speedometer is not telling your speed. Your speedometer is telling you how many miles you are traveling within an hour's time.
That's not your speed.
Your speed, so you can gauge speed by fast or slow. In fact, if you want to get super technical about it, there's a gear that runs up into your speedometer, and you're actually measuring the speed at which that gear rotates, which correlates to the gear ratio that you have in your axles, which then go out to your tires. I told a student today that if I could go back and do my life over again, I'd be a mechanic. What else is valid?
Bathroom scale?
Bathroom scale. Does it measure what it's supposed to measure?
I hope so.
What does a bathroom scale measure? Weight. It does. My wife gets on the scale and then she picks up the cat and she checks the difference and she reports to me how much the cat weighs. As if I care how much the cat weighs. Sorry. We're leaving. We're going to Seattle. And I'm like really looking forward to going home to a petless house. All right, so validity is a matter of degree. It's a unitary concept. It is specific to some particular group, use, or purpose for the test score in terms of interpretations. So what is valid? Well, it's going to measure what this test is accurately measuring. Is it measuring what it's supposed to? But our tests don't measure anything specific. Our tests measure constructs, right? How do we measure depression? What's that?
The Beck scale?
We could use the Beck Depression Inventory, sure. But what is it measuring for?
The severity.
The severity of
Depression.
your depression? Is that what it's doing?
Kind of just took a bunch of symptoms that people exhibit and drew a circle around them and labeled it depression.
Who's got a DSM with them? Your DSM, every diagnosis that is in the DSM is a construct. Right? There are different symptoms that when you put those symptoms together means that they're symptomatic of a possible diagnosis. Constructs. Happiness is a construct. It's not a thing. What are other constructs? God? Maybe, depending on what you believe. What's that?
Time.
Time is a construct. What does time consist of? So constructs are not immediately measured or measurable, but can be measured by the variables for which they are comprised. So time, what are the variables of time? This is getting like a little bit deeper than I know about physics and yeah, but we know it's a construct, so we'll stick with it. That's for sure. We know that to be the truth. How? We don't know, but we know it to be the truth.
Yeah, no, yeah. I was just thinking like, physics and like astronomy and all that stuff and how light years and all that stuff. It does get complicated when you start thinking about the construct of it, of time. Sounds good.
Any other constructs? I mean, think about it. Can you measure anxiety? Can you measure depression? Right? Can you measure bipolar disorder? What does depression look like? All we can do is describe it by the features or the symptoms, right? So we have this thing that doesn't really exist. Depression doesn't exist. There's no such thing as depression. There's no such thing as anxiety. What there is are a bunch of symptoms that people exhibit, which then we equate to the diagnosis of. Does that make sense? So when you say, oh, my depressed client, does that make sense? My client who is exhibiting depressive symptoms, that makes complete sense.
It's like intelligence doesn't really exist, it's just a construct that they use to describe certain traits or behaviors.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Intelligence is another construct. Very good. Yeah. This is what we deal with. We deal with constructs. And we don't want to, when we're using assessments or when we're working with clients, we don't want to start thinking that constructs are actual things or that people are these constructs, right? Because people are individuals. People are people, problems are problems, right? We just have to remember that. The person's not the problem is the problem. For example, we don't measure anger, but we can measure behavioral components of that. What are some of the behavioral components of anger, by the way?
Raising your voice.
Raising your voice, throwing things, aggression. Yeah, those are all symptoms of, right? We can measure. Can we measure me throwing something across the room? By distance, but not time, because that's a construct. Can we measure how loud my voice is getting? By decibels. Can we measure, what did we say? Aggression. Can we measure aggression? The behavior of aggression?
Pulse.
Okay. Measure pulse. Yeah. So we can measure certain things. Do all of those things, if I throw something, and my voice gets louder, and my pulse is higher, does that mean that I'm angry?
Could be working out.
I'm definitely not working out, but I could be working out. Yeah, what do you throw when you work out?
Shot put.
Shot put. Okay, I'm shot putting, and which is gonna make my, especially with my tennis elbow that I have right now, makes my pulse rise. What am I yelling about?
Just like run.
I love statistics! Is that what I'm doing? Yes. Am I angry? No. What about when the Giants score a touchdown? When Danny Dimes, throws a touchdown to Sterling Shepard in the end zone? Is my voice going up? Is my pulse rising? Am I throwing things? Probably. Like the clicker's going, the cat runs, the phone's like, what's going on, right? Because it's a great time. I'm not angry, I'm happy, right? That's some of the problems when we talk about these constructs, are that when you see, or when we talk about certain symptoms, they may also look like something else. Do we know what that's called? You guys know what that's called? Save that for next week when I bring the DSM. We'll look at that. So.
I have the DSM on my iPad.
Oh, okay.
Look at something? What?
How do you have it on your iPad?
It was $10 on eBay. Download it to Google Drive.
Oh. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, why don't you look? Can you look up a diagnosis for us? Yeah. Tell us. Like, if you look up, I don't know, whatever you get to, and what are the major headings that are in the DSM? Sound. That person's going fast. You can tell it's called the Doppler effect.
Is that the diagnostic features?
Diagnostic feature. So, is that the first part? What are you looking at?
Brief psychotic disorder.
Oh, brief psychotic disorder. That's awesome. Okay. So the first thing we have is.
Is it up here?
Keep going. So the first thing we have is diagnostic criteria. What is a diagnostic criteria in the DSM?
It says delusions, hallucinations.
Yes.
Do you want me
Absolutely.
to read that?
No.
Oh, sorry.
What is? That's okay. You're 100% correct. What is diagnostic criteria? What is that? What is that piece? Those are our symptoms. Absolutely. And this is where it's going to tell you, here are the symptoms, and here are many, and this is how many you have to have before the diagnosis. Let's keep going. What do we have next if we scroll?
March. So that's what March starts with?
If we keep up the major headers. So diagnostic feature. The nice part about the DSM, the diagnostic features tell you, what does this look like? What does this construct look like? How does it present? What are the features of it? Let's keep going.
Associated features supporting diagnosis.
So this is going to be things that we're going to see that will support and tell us if this person should be diagnosed with that or not.
Prevalence.
Prevalence.
Is that prevalence? It's just
Mhm.
low?
Yeah. You're populated.
Oh.
There's one. There's a copy of the DSM that is illegal. It's, what do they call that? Not an artifact. Forgery. And it looks very similar. So when I teach psychopathology, everybody has to have their books. And this one student comes up to me, she's like, "That's not that page at all." And then she brought her book up, and it was close, but all the pages were a little bit askew, like it had been photocopied, and the purple wasn't quite purple. And there was some minor typos, so there's some big ones out there as well. That's all right. Keep going up. Put her down, I'm sorry. Differential diagnosis. So differential diagnosis is a diagnosis that is going to look similar to, but be different. Bless you.
Thank you.
And so that happens often. If we were to look at major depressive disorder, what is differential diagnosis? What is something that looks like depression?
The other forms of depression, obviously,
There's a few that are in there, but there's a specific one that we need to be very, very much aware of because of the assessments that we use.
Anxiety.
Anxiety looks almost exactly like depression in certain situations and certain courses, right? Because the constructs, if we start breaking down what they are, they start to look similar. And so just because I'm looking this way might mean that I'm actually feeling a different way, right? And so that's why it's important to be able to understand that we do have constructs, except for time, because we can't define it very well. But all the other constructs that we can create may indicate something, but it also may indicate other things as well, right?
So the differential diagnosis is the other diagnoses that look similar.
It
to
could be.
that. And then the whole thing like with that also is just that, sometimes these diagnoses they overlap each other.
Oh.
So I said,
Yep.
that's why anxiety and depression look so much alike.
Mhm.
Usually it's very common for people who have anxiety to also have depression and vice versa.
And that's not differential diagnosis, that's comorbidity.
Yeah.
And so comorbidity tells us that there are certain diagnoses that go together very, very well. Borderline personality disorder and depression go together very, very well. You typically see those two comorbid with each other. So, yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk about psychopathology.
Does it have a column that says
Comorbidity?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
What I mean?
It does.
And can you say that constructs are how you operationally define certain things?
And the way that we operationally define diagnoses is through the DSM. It's our operational definition. Yeah. So some threats to validity, construct underrepresentation, construct irrelevance variance, other factors within the test, administration and scoring procedures, test taker characteristics, inappropriate test groups. Beck depression inventory, right? Keep talking about that one over and over again. So let's wrap our minds around this for a minute. A test can be reliable and still be invalid. A test can be reliable but be invalid. But an unreliable test can never be valid. That makes sense? So why could a test be reliable but be invalid?
I was kind of thinking like if you were to give a test to a group of people who don't speak English, but the test is in English, they're going to fail that test every single time, right? So that would be like reliable because you can pretty much rely on them to totally fail that test every single time you give it to them because they don't speak English. But it would be invalid because you're not actually measuring what the test is supposed to measure, you're measuring their English skills.
Yes, I'm going to posit this though. So, do you remember what we said about tests for ESL individuals, English as a second language? If it's a test written in English and they're ESL or they don't speak English at all, what is the test actually testing?
Yeah, it's testing their language ability.
Their language ability. So then in that case, it's both valid and reliable because it'll reliably measure whether a person can read
not
English.
the intention of the person giving the test.
Not the intention, but it's still not right. But we know, right, absolutely, that's what I'm saying.
So it would be invalid by that metric.
It
It's
is.
not,
It is. But if you can't understand the test becomes a measure of your ability, and so therefore it does become
but
valid.
it's invalid for the purposes of the people who are giving the test, because it's not what they're trying to test for.
Right, but exactly, that test is not measuring that anyway. Right, this is a secular argument.
Yeah.
So, absolutely, you're 100%. It is invalid, but it is valid, and it is measuring. Yeah, but it's still invalid.
I was gonna say like a Richter scale, like if it's off 5 or 10 pounds, like it's still gonna be reliable, give you the same results every time, but it's not valid.
Right, exactly. I can measure the wrong construct over and over and over again 100% of the time, but it's still the wrong construct. It'll never be right. So that's okay. If we have a scale that's 5 pounds off, we can figure that out and we can make adjustments to that. That's what's really nice about our assessments that are reliable but invalid. We can change those. But a test that is unreliable, meaning that it doesn't measure on a regular interval, you can't really do much with that except redo the whole entire assessment. So here are the ways that we form validity. So the first one is content validity. This involves how adequately the test represents the content domain, identifying the construct. This is what I'm going to ask you to do a little bit later tonight, is to take a look at the conners and look at the content validity of the questions and see if it's measuring what it should be measuring. I'll let you guys do that a little bit. Criterion-related validity refers to the relationship between test results and some external variable associated with the identified construct. So when we're looking at criterion related, this is where we're looking at, and I've used this example a few different times. Do you guys remember what would be an example of criterion related validity?
Isn't that similar to what, we discussed before when we were talking about reliability, that, when you ask a question like, let's say, happiness or whatever, then you ask something, that is like the complete opposite of it?
Mm-hmm.
Would that count as determinated? Because if you're actually measuring happiness, this other one that's measuring the complete opposite should be wrong. It should go with it.
You're on the right track. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
So is this sort of like the internal, like, if this variable goes up, this variable should go down?
Right. When we're talking about criterion related, though, we're talking about something that is external to it. And so that could be something like looking at another test, right? So if we're using the BDI, another depression inventory should show that the scores are moving in the same way. You can also use something the opposite. You also use an anxiety scale to see if they're moving in opposite ways, even though that's not how it really works.
So like, let's say you've got a test that measures if someone's supposed to be getting better and they're in therapy, and you keep testing them, and over and over again across a wide sample of people, it doesn't show them improving, then that's probably a threat to the test's validity, right? Because people should be improving. That's not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Depending on population, depending on counseling characteristics.
So does it have to be something? It's generally be something more reliable.
Yes.
Like as people age, they generally get X, Y, Z, and so if your test doesn't show that, then it's probably not valid. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to have something that's concrete. When we talk about effectiveness of counselors, the first thing you're going to notice next semester when we get into research, everybody wants to research the effectiveness of person-centered, of Gestalt. There's nothing out there because the construct of counselor effectiveness is just so wide and so random we can't actually measure that. So.
No, I was thinking, yeah, once you continue talking, that makes sense. It's like, they have like the SATs, and then with that, they become, okay, we have this criteria validity that you score high the SAT, then you'll do well in college and things like that. That would be.
That's more of a correlation between those. Mm-hmm. This is more, we want to have something a little bit more concrete, something that it already has. We typically want something that has reliability and validity built into it, so that we can take a look at those two numbers to see exactly what they're looking like.
So it would be like comparing one test to another.
Yeah.
That already has measures what construct.
Exactly. Yeah. And then construct validity within itself pertains to the appropriateness of the inferences drawn from the test scores on the construct being measured. So, sources of validity evidence our 5 sources of validity evidence are based on test content, response processes, internal structure, relation to other variables, and then the consequences of testing as well. So the test content validity begins at instrument construction. So again, kind of like reliability, we think, oh, this is probably really easy to do, but think about creating a test about a construct. So again, like we said, I think the first day, happiness. What are the constructs of happiness? What's a construct of happiness? Or what is, I'm sorry, the construct of happiness, what is component of happiness? There we go. Smiling? Okay. How many people do we all agree that smiling equates to happiness? Okay, no. Okay, that doesn't count. What else? Chemical levels in the brain. Okay. So chemical level, which ones specifically? Dopamine. Okay. Dopamine levels in the brain. Does that equate to happiness? No. All right. What's something else? Come on, we got to figure out one thing that we can agree on.
I think it's just like too subjective to answer because some things that make, the person A staying happy wouldn't make a person be happy. Like, I hate being hugged, but somebody else loves being hugged and they're happy with that.
I hate being hugged.
It's also like,
It's
it's
professional huggers, that doesn't make sense to me.
It's like all relative. Like on my worst day this year, it still might be better than my, best day in a different year when I was in a really horrible time in my life. So like,
It definitely is relative. Here's the thing. Anybody who's creating any type of assessment thinks they know about the construct because we do research on it, we do all the background, and we start writing questions, right? If I ask you to write down 5 questions that or 5 items that encapsulates happiness, you could do that right now, but it would be extremely subjective, and it would be your own account of what happiness is. What we then do is then we take the components of the construct and we poll people to see, is this correct? And that's what we're looking for with validity. And so what we're doing here is kind of a small exercise in that. We happen to have 20 people or 17 people in the room today that we can create a component of the construct and say, is this what it is? No. So it's the most difficult thing to do is to create a valid construct or a valid assessment because you think you're right. And when you're creating the assessment, you're like, oh no, this is going to be good. And then all of a sudden you test it and you find out, no, it's not valid. It's not actually measuring the construct that we were intending to measure. It's a very, very difficult process. And that's why we don't have a lot of really good assessments out there. That because we're human beings as well. Evidence of validity should be gathered based on internal structures of the test, so dimensionality. Some instruments measure a general construct while others measure several components of a construct. And when we play around with the conners, you're going to see that there's quite a few different constructs that are measured within this test. And when we look at that, we have to be able to give statistical data on all of those constructs. It's not just, is the conners a good valid measurement? Or a good reliable measurement. Well, there's so many different facets to it that we have to be able to speak to each individual one. And so we use factor analysis to figure that out. Measurement invariance ensures that the fairness is addressed in all aspects of the test, demonstrates applicability of the results to the examinee population and the relevant subgroups. We do this through our norming procedures. Reliability and precision, we already talked about this. So relations to other variables of evidence involves examining the relationships between test results and external variables that are thought to be a direct measure of the construct, as we've already spoken about. Focuses on the effectiveness, and this is checking against the criteria. So whatever you can use as something to be the criterion for what you're trying to measure that's external, that's away from your assessment, is going to help to prove the validity of it. So 2 forms, concurrent evidence, degree to which the predictor variable is related to the criterion at the same time, and the predictor evidence degree that estimates future levels of performance as well. Don't get caught up in the weeds with all this, that's one. I wonder if they could see that text message that just came up. Interesting. I know when I do screen captures it does, and I'll be like doing a lecture on something, and all of a sudden like my wife will text me something, and I'm like, oh, I gotta stop and restart this again.
that can be potentially embarrassing.
No, right? Potentially. Or sometimes I'm like, I might post to the class on the thing, I might be like, what's for dinner tonight? What should we have? That's usually the part. When are you coming home? All right. Criteria represents criterion measures. It should be relevant, reliable, and uncontaminated as best possible. So validity coefficients, remember we had our coefficients of reliability? Well, validity has coefficients as well, which are going to be different. So validity coefficients range from -1 to 1, with 1 indicating a perfect positive correlation. So when you're indicating your reliability, what is a very high coefficient? Yep, 0.9 and up, right? When we start looking, and it goes all the way down to like 0.5 is our kind of cutoff. Anything below 0.5 we're not okay with. Validity goes from -1 to +1. Just like with our reliability, we have errors, and prediction errors specifically. So the purpose of the relations of relations of other variable evidence is to show that test scores accurately predict the criterion performance of interests. So there's false positive and false negative errors. What's a false positive error? What's an example of that? What's that? A pregnancy test? Is it could have a false positive, could have a false negative too? I got a paper I gotta go.
We're talking about pregnancy complaint.
I'm happy to say that I said goodbye to Dr. Moss until next year, so hopefully my anxiety will be reduced greatly. Yeah, we see false positives when we have positives on tests where there shouldn't be. On our assessments for psychopathology, this is indicating, and we're going to actually look at some constructs where we can see false positives, where somebody may indicate that there is a positive symptom when in fact there isn't, but because of the way that the item is worded, it kind of throws it off. Same with false negative errors as well, which would obviously be the inverse. Relations to other variables evidence. Sources include evidence of homogeneity, conversion and discriminant evidence, group differentiation studies, age differentiation studies, experimental results, factor analysis. Yeah. I think that your book really likes validity and did an okay job of explaining reliability, but really gets into the weeds with validity. A lot of this we don't really need to really go into for this class. Let's move on at 7 o'clock. Evidence of homogeneity refers to how uniform the tests are in measuring a single concept. Strategies include showing high internal consistency coefficients and correlating the scores with the scores on the total test as well. So you're going to take a grouping of scores and take a look at how they relate in total. Conversion and discriminant evidence. Correlating instrument results in the results of another instrument that is assessed at the same construct, which is kind of what we said. If you're using the Hamilton anxiety, using the Beck anxiety, you're going to have convergent evidence of that. Discriminant evidence would be if you use the Beck depression and the Hamilton anxiety. They're supposed to measure two totally different things. Group differentiation studies used to analyze whether an instrument differentiates between different groups of individuals in ways that it predicts any type of theory, which again, we don't really see too much of. When you look at the NMY, you won't see much on group differential studies, which would be cool if you guys wanted to do at some point. Age differentiation studies, again, same thing, but with whether test scores increase or decrease with age. Experimental results, measures the effects of experimental interventions. Almost done here. So evidence based on consequences of testing refers to the intended and unintentional consequences of the use of test results. What are some unintentional consequences that might happen by the use of test results?
For example, when when they started doing these intelligence tests and things like that, they were more just trying to figure out, like, basically like a actual age that where a child should be at, this stage of their life, yada.
Mm-hmm.
But unintentionally, now it's becoming this whole testing, society where we test children all the time and we're constantly testing for school and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I have one test that I have used in the past that has enormous consequences, mostly negative consequences, huge negative consequences, yet I had to give it. Anybody think of what test that might be? A drug test. Because when I was in my doctoral internship, I was at a drug and alcohol center in Washington, Pennsylvania, which is like in the middle of nowhere. And the probation officers used to send their people on probation over to see us for counseling, and they would ask that we give them a drug test. What would happen if I didn't do the drug test? What do you think?
Would be complying with the basis on which the clients are being sent to you, right?
Mm-hmm. So the lack of compliance, what do you think would happen to me? Nothing. What would happen to them? They violate parole. What if I gave them a drug test and they tested positive? Violate their parole or probation. What happens when you violate somebody's probation or parole? They typically go to jail for either a little time or for the rest of their sentence. The unintended consequences of what we do is for testing. Right? It was pretty valid, it was pretty reliable to test, but there's consequences to our tests that we administer. We have to be very, very much aware of what those consequences could be. Okay. And that's that. So let me stop this.